There is no bigger edge in DFS than NFL DFS, and the Super Bowl is our last chance to play until the fall. Plus, with a bunch of casual money flooding the lobbies this Sunday, it's a great opportunity to make a little extra cash while you're watching the big game. My name's Jordan Chan, I'm SaberSim's head coach, and in this video, I'll walk through how to build winning NFL Showdown lineups for the Super Bowl this Sunday. I'll walk through the steps to build on SaberSim, show you how you can apply your takes, and give you a couple of the takes that I have for this game, and unveil a few Super Bowl specific tips for the slate. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do on SaberSim is get your contest file uploaded. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here in the contest tab by downloading my template file from DK and pulling that into SaberSim. And it'll give me an opportunity here to talk about contest selection for the Super Bowl. Now, a couple notes here on contest selection. In general, if you're following our DFS profit plan advice, it's going to still put you on the right track. If you haven't seen those videos before, the general principle is you want to play as many entries as possible, packing your lineups into the contests that are under the $3 entry fee where possible to make sure that you're limiting your variance and playing against the weakest competition as you can. Now, with the Super Bowl, the contests are going to be pretty massive. This is the biggest slate of the year after all. And as contests get particularly large in Showdown, they can become tough to beat. As lineups are more and more likely to be duped, if your lineup wins the contest and is duped with a bunch of other people, you're sharing more and more of your winnings, which means generally, as lineups get duped more and more, their expected value, their profitability goes down. But as contests get enormous, it can be harder and harder to find lineups that have a low number of dupes and still have a relatively high probability of winning. So a couple quick notes in general on this. First, if you can play DraftKings where you live, I prefer the DraftKings single game NFL product for a couple reasons. One, you have one extra player per lineup. That means there's more possible lineup constructions, and different lineup constructions are going to be a little bit less likely to be duped. Perhaps more importantly, because DraftKings has a cost multiplier, a salary multiplier on their captain spot, it means a lot more captains are viable. On FanDuel, it costs the same to use a player in the utility or the MVP spot, which means there ends up only being a handful of really viable MVP position players, again, limiting the types of lineups you can play. So you can absolutely beat FanDuel if it's your only option to play. That's totally fine. But if you're between playing on DraftKings or FanDuel, I think DraftKings has a little bit more of a beatable game type. Second, again, if you're following the profit plan, you're playing the contests that are under the $3 range where possible, playing as many different lineups as possible, you're still going to be on the right track. However, if you need to break ties when it comes to contest selection, so you're between two different contests, you're not sure maybe how to allocate the last 50, 100, $20, whatever it is of your bankroll for the slate, I would lean a little bit more to the smaller contests, especially if your goal is pure profit seeking, highest ROI possible here. The lottery tickets are fun. It's definitely fun playing the giant contests where you can turn $3 into 100K or $10 or $15 into $1 million if you had the unique winner. But those contests are going to be extremely high variance, and they can actually be a little bit tougher to beat when the contests get this large because it's so hard to find lineups that are unique or low duped that have a probability of winning. So looking at my contest file here, you can see I stuck very closely to the profit plan. So most of my entries that I'm playing are under the $3 range or under the $5 range with less than a $25,000 prize pool. So I'm maxing pretty much everything that is available to me in that prize range. But what I did is once I got above that range, I decided to stick to more single entry type contests up to $12 here. These contests are just a little bit smaller. You can see a lot of these here have say less than 15,000, 25,000 entrants here. It's going to be a little bit more easy for me to realize some of my profit in these contests with lower variance, and I'm going to have an opportunity to play lower duped, more unique lineups. So on the contest selection side of things, still follow the profit plan. I'd lean a little bit more into DraftKings than FanDuel if you can. And when you're breaking ties about how to allocate your bankroll, break them in the direction of smaller contests overall. So now let's actually build some lineups. Now, there is a ton of noise surrounding the Super Bowl. Everybody thinks they know exactly how the game is going to go. You're probably going to hear a ton of takes about what player is going to play well, what player isn't going to play well, lines that are inefficient in the betting markets. Ultimately, what we want to do is come up with the full range of possible game scripts of the way the game could play out. synthesize all of the data available to us, and build a huge pool of lineups that cover the whole spectrum of a 13-6 low scoring game, of a blowout, of a game that goes way over the total, of a game where a surprise player ends up catching 2 touchdowns and you had to have him in your lineup. We want to cover the whole range of game scripts, and that's exactly what sims do. So SaberSim simulations are going to take in all of the data available to us here. The Vegas markets, the prop markets, our internal assessment of individual player skills, and run play-by-play game simulations of the game hundreds of thousands of times. And when you build your lineups on SaberSim, you're getting an optimal lineup for a single game simulation. So we're going to have this awesome spread of different lineups that we can look through, filter, tweak, sort through, and it's really going to help us set up our foundation for the lineups that we end up playing. Because of how valuable these sims are, in my first build, I'm going to be completely unopinionated. Now, I have some takes about this game. I'll apply those in a second, but I want to see what the sims think about the game right off the bat. So I'm going to go ahead and build my pool. I'm only going to do 2 things here. The first is I'm going to increase my number of lineups up to 5,000. That is the maximum value allowed on the SaberSim Ultimate plan. I'm going to tweak my salary settings here. I want to see lineups that have extremely low salary. I'm willing to at least entertain the idea that a very low salary build could be viable, especially knowing that even if you get a very low salary build in your pool, it was still the optimal lineup for a given simulation. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my max salary down to 49,000 here. Again, I want to play lineups that are low duped, that have a high probability or a higher probability of being unique here. There are a ton of possible lineups you can build for an NFL Showdown slate. We're only going to get to look at 5,000 here. I'm going to assume that lineups that are very likely to be duped and duped frequently are very likely to use a lot of the salary. That comes from people building by hand, using traditional optimizers. They're going to be incentivized to use a lot of the salary. I want to see the lineups that leave a little bit on the table here. And then we'll just make the 2 changes to player projections to abide by DraftKings rules, and we'll get our first build running here. Okay, so now we have our pool set up. We've got the 282 lineups right out of the gate and the pool of 5,000 lineups here, each one of which, again, is an optimal lineup for a single simulation. The next thing we want to do is run our contest sims. So the reason we do this, and the reason this is extremely valuable for Showdown, is we have all of these lineups now. Again, we know that they're the optimal for a given sim, but we want to see which one is the most profitable. We are comparing how likely a lineup is to be the winner for a particular contest with how many other people are likely to play that lineup, how often that lineup is to be duplicated. That's a difficult thing to assess in your head or using heuristics about ownership sum or product ownership or cumulative ownership. It's hard to know, is a lineup that is duped 8 times in a contest or is expected to be duped 8 times in a contest better than a lineup that is expected to be duped twice if it has a relatively much higher chance of winning the contest? The contest sims are going to go straight to the source and help us solve and suss out some of that information here in our portfolio. Okay, so our contest sim is complete. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is actually get this set of lineups entered into my entries file, just so I get a better sense of what I'm actually playing, what SaberSim thinks is the best way to play. So I'm going to go to autofill here. And what I typically recommend doing here is sorting by prize pool, high to low, and then filling with unique rank, and then saving to contests. What this is going to do is this is going to fill the best possible lineups in each contest I'm playing, filling the highest prize pool contests first, and then it's going to move to the next contest, eliminate the lineups that have been used already in the first contest, and keep going down the list. Long story short, what you're getting here is the best possible lineup played into each entry that you are playing, while making sure you're playing a unique lineup in every entry you're playing. Okay, so now we have our base build run. If you didn't have any opinions about the game and you just wanted to play entirely what SaberSim gave you, you could probably just enter this entries file at this point and be in a pretty good spot. But I have some opinions about this game here, and I think in general for the Super Bowl, it's good to have a couple takes because it will help make you a little bit different than what other people are doing here. So let's take a look at what we got out of our pool here and start to see maybe what the Sims think, so we have that data point, and then also how we might want to apply some of our own takes here. So the 3 columns that I think are the most helpful for doing this are your exposure column, which is the percentage of that player that you have, your pool, which is the percentage of that player you have in your entire pool here, and your leverage column, which is going to let you know whether or not you went over or under the field on a particular player. So big stands right off the bat. We're quite over on Saquon Barkley, captain here, and then even with the field on a handful of other captains. And on the fade, I would say we're taking maybe a light fade, a very light fade on a handful of players. So SaberSim thinks the big stand to take at your captain spot is Saquon Barkley, and that he stands far and away as the best captain spot. It's interesting that he is the highest owned captain. So SaberSim definitely thinks that like the field just is not getting to the best player on this slate frequently enough, and slamming him should be the way to go. Now, that wasn't initially the direction that I was going to play, but that's a useful data point here that I want to catalog and think about here because it's obvious based on the leverage that SaberSim wants to take a big stand. Let's look at the flex spot here as well and see if we are getting any other leverage here. So we're getting quite over on Dallas Goedert as a positive stand here in the flex position. I do like that one. One of the takes that I have about this game is that the Eagles pass catchers in general are going a bit under-owned. So I do like that direction here. A couple other players here, slightly over the field on like the defenses, Juju. I like to really look at players that stand out as outliers in my leverage column here. And then big fades are on Saquon Barkley as flex. You do need to be a little bit careful with thinking about both the player in the captain spot and the flex spot. SaberSim's not fading Saquon Barkley at flex so much as we are going over the field, the captain spot here. You can't roster the player in both positions. So sometimes if you are taking a big stand in one spot or the other, it will lead to looking like you are fading the player in the other position. So just something to be aware of. But a bit of a negative leverage spot on AJ Brown. So that's an interesting one for me. That was probably one of my favorite plays on the slate here, a play that I wanted to get some exposure to. I might still go that direction, but it is worth noting that SaberSim likes that fade here. So now that we've analyzed our build, we've gotten a little bit of a basis of what the Sims think. We need to start applying our own takes. And you really have two tools at your disposal to do this. You can adjust exposure. So if I was looking at AJ Brown here and I saw that I had 15% AJ Brown and I want to be at least even with the field, I can just set a min exposure to AJ Brown and then resave to contests. And then SaberSim on the next fill here as it goes through, it's going to make sure that I get 25% exposure to AJ Brown. So now you can see we are up to, where did he go? We are up to 25% exposure to AJ Brown here. The other tool you have at your disposal, and this is a little bit more involved, there's a couple more steps here, is making an adjustment to a player projection. Now, if you adjust a player projection, it's very likely that you're going to want to rebuild your pool and rerun your contest sims and start over because you want your pool to reflect the assumptions of your projection. If you think Travis Kelce and Noah Gray should have the same projection in SaberSim and you want to take a big stand like that, you don't want to just adjust the exposures because your pool in that case is resting on a totally different assumption about the game than the one you actually have. So I know this can be a little confusing. I think in simplest terms, if you are adjusting an exposure in like making a couple small tweaks, so you saw maybe bumping AJ Brown from 15% exposure to 25% exposure here, I think that's a good way to do that. But if you have a bigger take about a way a player should be projected, or you really disagree with your pool, the assumptions of your pool overall, that's when I would make an adjustment to the player projection instead. So I have a few takes about this game. I want to run a build where I've inputted all of my different takes that I have here, and I want to see how the numbers shake out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a brand new build here and start over a little bit from scratch and start applying some of the takes that I have about this game. So the first take I have about this game overall is I just like Eagles plus 1.5. We actually on the Sims, at least at the time I'm recording this video, agree we're making this game to be like KC minus a half point or almost a pick'em here. Vegas has it at KC minus 1.5. I like the Eagles side of this here, and I just want to play into the Eagles winning this game script. Maybe that's because I just don't want the Chiefs to win, but that's just a general take that I have about this game is that I like the Eagles. So I'm actually going to start with a team total adjustment here to reflect that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically remove about a point from the Kansas City Chiefs and give that to the Eagles. And we're going to be, let's just actually make it easier and just do 24 and 25.5 here and then click yes. And what SaberSim is going to do is adjust the sims that are used slightly here to reflect the way that I have the spread. As we bounce back here to the players tab, you can see that we'll have adjusted all of the player projections, and we can click the SaberSim adjusted projection here. And it's just going to give a slight boost to the Eagles as a whole, give a slight dock to the Chiefs as a whole, and say, this is what the players would be projected if this is what the spread actually was. So if you have takes about the spread, the money line, that kind of stuff, big picture game stuff, the team totals can be a really useful tool here to use. I would be careful if you are going towards the extremes. If you're moving teams by more than even 3 points, I would be a little bit cautious and probably wouldn't move them by any more than 6 or 7 points. You're just going to start limiting the number of sims you have to make that type of adjustment. It's perfectly fine to experiment with those types of large adjustments with team totals, but the further you're moving away from the actual mean outcome, the more you want to double check and make sure everything looks good after you've done that. Okay, so now let's look at some individual players here I like. So first things first, I do like that Eagles pass catchers here. I came into this with the feeling that A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith were all going to be a little bit under-owned relative to where I think their actual upside is. I think Saquon Barkley's obviously going to command a ton of ownership. I think both quarterbacks are going to command a lot of ownership. I think with the Chiefs favored, I think Pacheco and Kareem Hunt are probably both going to look like values. I think Travis Kelce is going to be a popular option. I just could see a situation where these pass catchers go a little bit overlooked. So I'm going to make some adjustments to these projections here. I want to boost how much I'm getting of these players into my build. I typically like to use increments of about 5 to 10% of that player's projection as I'm making these adjustments here. And I will adjust it based on what I saw in that initial test build. So A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith, all conveniently right next to each other. I'm going to try to adjust these players around 5 to 10% based on what I saw in that initial build and my individual takes. So I'm going to start with a 10% adjustment to A.J. Brown here. I'm going to bring him to, I'm going to actually just be slightly under that and bring him to 16.4 here. So I'm basically adding 1.5-ish to his projection. Dallas Goedert, I'm going to actually add a little bit less here because we know that the Sims are already getting quite a bit of Dallas Goedert. So I'm going to just go to, say, 13.3. And then Devontae Smith, I'm going to give also maybe a point and some change and go to about 13. So I'm making a pretty big adjustment here. Not only have we flipped the spread and changed it to basically Eagles -1.5, I'm also boosting some of these pass catchers here. But I want to see how this build looks. This can be an iterative process where you're playing with this a few different times, running a few different builds. Now, one other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase the projection for Samaje Perine. He seems like the perfect gadget player that scores a touchdown for the Chiefs in a Super Bowl. It seems like the Chiefs have something like this planned every single year with one of these gadgety type players. Samaje Perine looks like he's probably going to be the most popular of the options down in this range, but he's been involved in the offense throughout the season, throughout the playoffs here. I just could very easily see them scheming up some work for him here. And it seems like a very reliable option to get some touches to potentially score a touchdown. Probably one of my favorite punt play options here on SaberSim. So I'm going to go ahead and just give him, say, a increase up to, let's do 3.5 here. You do want to be careful with adjustments to players with very low projections down here, just because they can be quite sensitive to adjustments. If you bump him to 4, you might get a ton of Samaje Perine in your pool. I just want to give a light touch adjustment there. A couple other players that I'm just going to make a small adjustment to. I just want to differentiate at this bottom range a little bit here. I'm going to bring Kenneth Gainwell and Will Shipley up to a point. We've seen both of them be involved. I'll be very interested to see if Kenny Gainwell is actually active on Sunday, and the projections in this area could change quite a bit between now and then. It is Wednesday morning when I'm recording this here, but for now, if the game was locking and presumably they were both active right now, I would want to make sure I had a little bit of both of those guys in my pool. I'm also going to make a similar adjustment to Grant Calcaterra here, who has been involved in the offense. Another guy that I think is interesting from like an anytime touchdown perspective. Just a guy that I think could get targeted here, and I want to incorporate him in my lineups. And then I'm going to uncheck some of these extremely low projected players from my pool entirely. They're just players that I don't really want to take with me into my portfolio. I think it's pretty unlikely that they play at all. Remigio does return kicks for the Chiefs, so I'm going to keep him in the pool. And I could see Johnny Wilson potentially being a red zone target, so I'm going to leave him in there as well. But I'm just going to cross off couple guys that I think are pretty unlikely to see the field at all. They have extremely low projections, but I just don't want to take up spots in my pool with them. Okay, so now we've applied a bunch of takes. That's pretty much everything that I think about this game, at least as of right now. Now I'm going to go ahead here and make an adjustment again to 5,000 lineups, let in some low salary builds into my pool, and cap my max salary at 49,000. And we will again build some lineups. Now, when you're building lineups at this step, what SaberSim is doing is actually really cool. We're using our foundation of sims as a baseline, but taking into account all of the other adjustments that we've made here. We're tweaking the sims slightly based on the new spread that I've put in, the new player projections that I've put in, all of these different factors that reflect the way that I think about the game here. And we'll get lineups that are now expected to be optimal when my game script plays out, when my version of the game plays out. So I've applied my takes that I have here, but I'm still going to get a lot of the value of the sims. Okay, now that the lineups are done, let's run another set of contest sims here. And again, extremely valuable part of the process where we're taking this portfolio now of lineups that reflect the way that I think the game is going to go and comparing them against what we expect the field to do to find the most profitable way to play for the way that I think the game is going to play out. While this is running, I will mention again that I do think it's extremely valuable to have some opinions and takes for the Super Bowl in particular. It will just help you be a little bit different. The way you're thinking about the game is going to be different than the way that other people are thinking about the game. So synthesize some of the noise, some of the research that you're doing, what you're seeing in the initial sims with your takes on the game, and take a stand. It's worth it. You're still going to end up being able to play very profitable lineups in your portfolio here, but you're going to be able to do so in a way that is more unique to you. Okay, now that our contest sims are complete, we'll go ahead and re-autofill everything here. So we will save to contests and see what we are getting in our portfolio now. Okay, so now let's review here and see what we are getting. I always like to start with the captain spot. I think it's just easiest to see. And we'll take a look at the leverage here. And it seems like now our big stand is A.J. Brown. We are also getting over on Dallas Goedert. We're still even with the field here on Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith. We have a little about even with Noah Gray as well. In terms of fades, we see a lot of Chiefs fades. We're fading the Chiefs almost entirely here, which makes sense. We flipped the spread on its head and we made those adjustments to the pass catchers there. So this very much makes sense with the way that I had outlined the game going in my head. In terms of what I think here, this is a pretty big stand on A.J. Brown, but I think he's my favorite play on the slate. We did make a pretty big projection adjustment to him overall. Personally, I could actually see our SaberSim projection on A.J. Brown coming up as the week goes along. Either way, still willing to bet on the upside there. I think it's going to be quite a bit different than what other people are doing. If we actually get 6% ownership on A.J. Brown at captain in the Super Bowl, it's just wrong. I'm willing to make that bet. I like the way that this looks. Let's bounce over to our flex spots here and see what we're going for. We do start to see then our real exposure to Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith pop up there. So I'm fine with that approach. A.J. Brown at the captain, getting some exposure to those two guys in the captain spot, but more even with the field. And then our bigger stand on those guys coming in the flex spot. I really like that. Again, another reason why the sims can be valuable in this way is that I applied my take in a way that wasn't saying the way that the lineups needed to be constructed, and then SaberSim saying, okay, if this is the way you think the game is going to go, then the best way to build these lineups is by taking the stand on A.J. Brown at the captain spot and letting Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith show up more as flex. That's just another way. I didn't have to tell SaberSim build me lineups that look like this. SaberSim's, I said, this is what I think the game is going to happen like, and SaberSim said, this is how you should build your lineup. So just a really valuable part of the process there. A couple other things I wanted to take a quick look at. I did want to see where my Samaje Perine exposure ended up. We are about even, slightly over the field on Perine here now. Again, if he's going to be the chalky option down in this range, along with maybe a guy like Noah Gray, which it looks like the ownership projections seem to think here, then I'm okay with just coming in even on the field. I do like him in this game, but I like him more if he's a low-owned option, and it doesn't really look like that's what's going to happen here. So I'm actually okay with going even with the field. I think potentially, depending on the way that the projections shake out as we lead up to Sunday, I could see myself maybe boosting this a little bit more. But if he's going to be chalky in this range, then I'm good at just coming in even with the field there. We didn't get any Shipley or Kenny Gainwell. I'm good with that. Again, if the slate was locking right now and both of these guys were actually in the game, I don't know if I would want to go in that direction. I think either could potentially be interesting, or I think Will Shipley could probably be somewhat interesting if Kenneth Gainwell is ruled out. We'll figure that out as we get closer to the game. And then a little bit of exposure to some of these guys, like just a handful of lineups down in this bottom range. So I'm pretty happy with the way that this portfolio has worked out. Now, if this was your portfolio and maybe that's a little bit too much AJ Brown exposure, or you want to make sure that you're getting enough Samaje Perine in your lineups, this is where you can restart the process. You could make another projection adjustment and rebuild lineups. Maybe if you just want to get to 25% Samaje Perine, you can set that as a min exposure here. But the process is set your takes, see that the way that the lineups work out, and then review and see how that shook out in the build. Are you happy with what you're looking at now? Do you want to make some additional adjustments? Depending on the slate, I'll go through a couple rounds of this. Typically 1 or 2 rounds, I'm able to get a portfolio of lineups I'm happy with. I did just realize that I didn't sort by prize pool on this fill, so I am going to go ahead and do that and resave. Doesn't have a huge impact either way, but I'm going to go ahead and do that here. So a few of you watching may have noticed that my min destination ROI after this fill is currently negative. It was actually like that in the first build here as well. What does that mean? That means that the lowest ROI of a lineup that I'm playing in this current portfolio is expected to be minus ROI at lock. That's obviously a bad thing. We don't really want to play lineups that are expected to be unprofitable. Why is that happening? The main reason why is that NFL Showdown is hard. The reason it is hard is we have this pool. We have 5,000 lineups that are all optimals for a given game script. But when comparing those lineups to the field, comparing how often those lineups are duplicated in the field relative to how often they win, a lot of the lineups in our pool aren't expected to be profitable lineups. The effective pool of lineups that we're actually working with here that are expected to be profitable is relatively small. If you're playing a very large entries file, so I have 282 entries here, or you have set restrictions in your build with lineup rules, salary restrictions like I have, anything like that, it can potentially restrict that pool even further. Now, I will mention that for the Super Bowl in particular, I'm not actually super worried about this for a couple of reasons. First, our fields assume that there are 20,000 lineups max in each contest that we're playing here, which is obviously not the case. And also that the field is generally going to be a little bit sharper than they actually are. Our field lineups are built algorithmically using a industry aggregate projection and then reviewed manually by our team to tweak that information. But we're generally assuming that if you took a very rational set of 20,000 lineups based on how the industry at large projects all the players, this is what the field would do. That's not the field you're actually going to play against on Sunday. There's going to be a lot of casual money, a lot of bad lineups, some lineups that are just optimal lineups for a given projection set, maybe duped 1,000 times. There's probably a little bit more hidden profitability in the contest that you actually play than the SaberSim contest sims might think pre-lock. So especially for the Super Bowl, I'm not incredibly worried about a lineup that looks like it might be slightly unprofitable before lock. So really, I would probably play this entries file and be totally comfortable with it. It's also a handful of the lineups at the very bottom end, my dime package, my pylon. I still want to play profitable lineups into that contest where possible, but I would probably be okay playing this here. With that said, a couple things you can do to bring this min destination ROI back up. The easiest thing you can do, but one that has some caveats, is to just change your fill method to rank and then resave your contests. What this is going to do instead of unique rank is just play the best possible lineup into every single entry that you're playing. If the same lineup appears in the play action and the minimax, then we're going to play it in both of them. We are going less deep into our pool, and you can see here now our min destination ROI is about 1%. In practice, that's probably not a ton different than the minus 15% that we were just looking at here. And we've taken on a lot more variance here because we're probably playing the same lineup in a lot of our different contests here. But it does bring your min destination ROI up. Theoretically, you're playing a more profitable portfolio here, if one that is a little more correlated to itself and a little higher variance. But probably one of the better things that you can do if you are worried about this here, or if your min destination ROI is very low, is to relax some of your restrictions that you've set on the build. In particular, where this can really be impactful is by having limited your player pool. Like I did limit my player pool a little bit here on the bottom end, but if you are unchecking Saquon Barkley completely, you're going to see you have a lot fewer profitable lineups showing up in your pool. If you have set max salary restrictions here, that can be a factor, or min salary restrictions of any kind. Or if you've set lineup rules can also remove some of the profitable portions of your pool pretty quickly. So I am going to experiment with one more build here because I do want to see if I can get this min destination up a little bit more. So I'm going to clone this build here so I can take over everything that I've done so far. And this time I'm going to run one more, but I'm going to do it back at the original max salary range. I just want to see how much that salary threshold is actually affecting my builds. I think that's a good idea to make that adjustment to salary in the effort to make your lineups less duplicated, but not if I'm sacrificing a ton of ROI in the contest sim. I just want to see what this looks like here with a normal max salary. Okay, so I rebuild my lineups, I ran the contest sims, and I just did a fill on unique rank here, and we see now my min destination ROI is up to about 17.5%. So originally, and this is with unique rank, it was at minus 15%. So that salary threshold I was setting here was actually added up to about 30% difference in my min destination ROI. Every NFL Showdown slate is different. There have been NFL Showdown slates this year where I was able to set max salary at 48,000 lineups, 48,000 salary, and build a ton of profitable lineups. Looks like this is a slate where we're a lot more sensitive to salary. I might still experiment with a max of something like 49.5 when it comes time to actually build my lineups, because I do like that salary ceiling as a way to get different. But I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to sacrifice 30% min destination ROI to have capped my salary by 1,000. So I think this is the portfolio of lineups that I'm ultimately happy with here. And this is probably what I would play if the contest was locking right now. So that's it. This is how I would approach the Super Bowl, building on SaberSim. To sum up some of the key points that I covered here, first, as it relates to contest selection, you still want to follow the DFS profit plan, but I would lean a little more heavily into DraftKings over FanDuel if you can play DK, and break ties by playing contests that are a little bit smaller, especially if your goal is to maximize your profit. If you just want the lottery ticket of the big flagship GPPs, go for it. But if your goal is maximizing ROI, I would break ties in the direction of the smaller single entry 3 max type stuff. When it comes to building your lineups, understand the value of the SaberSim simulations and run a base build to just see what the sims are giving you before you apply any takes. Use that as a data point to get a sense of where SaberSim's at and synthesize that with the rest of your research. But apply your takes, apply your opinions and your research about the game. If you have small, subtle takes, you can make those adjustments in the form of min and max exposure. But if you have bigger picture opinions about the way that the game is going to play out or the way that you should build profitable lineups, I like making those adjustments in the form of projection changes. You can use the team totals if you have big picture changes that you want to make about the game overall, or player projection adjustments of, say, about 5 to 10% per increment to apply your takes about the game. Then run builds each time you make a change here or each time you make a group of changes, and see how that affects your exposure, your pool exposure, and see if you feel like that is in line with the way that you wanted to play the slate. If you have access to the SaberSim contest sims via the SaberSim Ultimate plan, use them. They are extremely valuable in sussing out the difference between how likely a lineup is to win versus how likely it is to be played by others, and take the way that you think the game is going to play out and figure out the most profitable way to play DFS based on that information. Now, thanks for sticking around with me here throughout this entire video. I know this was a long one. If you want even more content, I released a video earlier this NFL season called Master the Art of NFL DFS Showdown. It is an in-depth view of advanced strategies where you can probably take what I've covered in this video and go one step further in terms of additional strategies, additional tips and tricks for NFL Showdown. So I'd check that out. In the meantime, thanks again for watching and good luck.